Alaska, Chukchi, is a non-contiguous U.S. state on the northwest extremity of North America, part of the western United States region. It is one of the non-contiguous U.S. states, alongside Hawaii. Alaska is also considered to be the northernmost, westernmost, and easternmost. The Aleutian Islands cross the 180th meridian into the Eastern Hemisphere state in the United States. It borders the Canadian territory of Yukon and the province of British Columbia to the east. It shares a western maritime border in the Bering Strait with Russia's Chukotka autonomous Okrug. The Chukchi and Beaufort Seas of the Arctic Ocean lie to the north, and the Pacific Ocean lies to the south. Technically, it is a semi-exclave of the U.S. and is the largest exclave in the world. Alaska is the largest U.S. state by area, comprising more total area than the following three largest states of Texas, California, and Montana combined, and is the seventh largest subnational division in the world. It is the third least populous and most sparsely populated U.S. state. However, with a population of 740,133 as of 2024, it is the most populous territory in North America, located mostly north of the 60th parallel, with more than quadruple the combined populations of northern Canada and Greenland. 6. The state contains the four largest cities in the United States by area, including the state capital of Juneau. The state's most populous city is Anchorage, and approximately half of Alaska's residents live within its metropolitan area. Indigenous people have lived in Alaska for thousands of years, and it is widely believed that the region served as the entry point for the initial settlement of North America by way of the Bering Land Bridge. The Russian Empire was the first to actively colonize the area beginning in the 18th century, eventually establishing Russian America, which spanned most of the current state and promoted and maintained a native Alaskan Creole population. 7. The expense and logistical difficulty of maintaining this distant possession prompted its sale to the U.S. in 1867 for $7.2 million United States dollars, equivalent to $157 million in 2023. The area went through several administrative changes before becoming organized as a territory on May 11, 1912. It was admitted as the 49th state of the U.S. on January 3, 1959. Abundant natural resources have enabled Alaska, with one of the smallest state economies, to have one of the highest per capita incomes with commercial fishing and the extraction of natural gas and oil dominating Alaska's economy. U.S. Armed Forces bases and tourism also contribute to the economy. More than half of the state is federally owned land containing national forests, national parks, and wildlife refuges. It is among the most irreligious states and one of the first to legalize recreational marijuana. The indigenous population of Alaska is proportionally the second highest of any U.S. state, at over 15%, after only Hawaii. The name Alaska, Russian, Romanized, Aljaska, was introduced during the Russian colonial period when it was used to refer to the Alaska Peninsula. It was derived from an Aleut language idiom, Alaksak, meaning the mainland or, more literally, the object towards which the action of the sea is directed. Numerous indigenous peoples occupied Alaska for thousands of years before the arrival of European peoples to the area. Linguistic and DNA studies done here have provided evidence for the settlement of North America by way of the Bering Land Bridge. At the Upward Sun River site in the Tanana Valley in Alaska, remains of a 6-week-old infant were found. The baby's DNA showed that she belonged to a population that was genetically separate from other native groups present elsewhere in the New World at the end of the Pleistocene. Ben Potter, the University of Alaska Fairbanks archaeologist who unearthed the remains at the Upward Sun River site in 2013, named this new group Ancient Beringen. The Tlingit people developed a society with a matrilineal kinship system of property inheritance and descent in what is today southeast Alaska, along with parts of British Columbia and the Yukon. Also in southeast were the Haida, now well known for their unique arts. The Tsimshian people came to Alaska from British Columbia in 1887, when President Grover Cleveland and later the U.S. Congress granted them permission to settle on Annette Island and found the town of Metlakatla, Alaska. All three of these peoples, as well as other indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast, experienced smallpox outbreaks from the late 18th through the mid-19th century, with the most devastating epidemics occurring in the 1830s and 1860s, resulting in high fatalities and social disruption. Some researchers believe the first Russian settlement in Alaska was established in the 17th century. According to this hypothesis, in 1648, several Kachas of Semyon Desniav's expedition came ashore in Alaska by storm and founded this settlement. This hypothesis is based on the testimony of Chukchi geographer Nikolai Dorkin, who had visited Alaska in 1764 to 1765 and who had reported on a village on the Kuvrin River, populated by bearded men who pray to the icons. Some modern researchers associate Kuvrin with Koyuk River. The first European vessel to reach Alaska is generally held to be the St. Gabriel under the authority of the surveyor M.S. Vozdev and assistant navigator I. Fyodorov on August 21, 1732, during an expedition of Siberian Cossack A.F. Shestakov and Russian explorer Dmitry Pavlitsky 1729 to 1735. 19. Another European contact with Alaska occurred in 1741, when Vitus Bering led an expedition for the Russian Navy aboard the St. Peter, after his crew returned to Russia with sea otter pelts judged to be the finest fur in the world. Small associations of fur traders began to sail from the shores of Siberia toward the Aleutian Islands. The first permanent European settlement was founded in 1784. Between 1774 and 1800, Spain sent several expeditions to Alaska to assert its claim over the Pacific Northwest. In 1789, a Spanish settlement and fort were built in Nuka Sound. These expeditions gave names to places such as Valdez, Bucareli Sound, and Cordova. Later, the Russian-American company carried out an expanded colonization program during the early to mid-19th century. Sitka, renamed New Archangel from 1804 to 1867, on Baranof Island in the Alexander Archipelago in what is now southeast Alaska, became the capital of Russian America. It remained the capital after the colony was transferred to the United States. The Russians never fully colonized Alaska, and the colony was never very profitable. Evidence of Russian settlement in names and churches survives throughout southeastern Alaska. In 1867, William H. Seward, the United States Secretary of State under President Andrew Johnson, negotiated the Alaska Purchase referred to pejoratively as Seward's Folly with the Russians for $7. $2 million. Russia's contemporary rulers are Alexander II, the Emperor of the Russian Empire, King of Poland, and Grand Duke of Finland, also planned the sale. The purchase was made on March 30, 1867. 6 months later, the commissioners arrived in Sitka, and the formal transfer was arranged. The formal flag raising took place at Fort Sitka on October 18, 1867. In the ceremony, 250 uniformed U.S. soldiers marched to the governor's house at Castle Hill, where the Russian troops lowered the Russian flag and the U.S. flag was raised. This event is celebrated as Alaska Day, a legal holiday on October 18th. Alaska was loosely governed by the military initially and was administered as a district starting in 1884, with a governor appointed by the United States President. A federal district court was headquartered in Sitka. For most of Alaska's first decade under the United States flag, Sitka was the only community inhabited by American settlers. They organized a provisional city government, which was Alaska's first municipal government, but not in a legal sense. 23 legislation allowing Alaskan communities to legally incorporate as cities did not come about until 1900, and home rule for cities was extremely limited or unavailable until statehood took effect in 1959. Starting in the 1890s and stretching in some places to the early 1910s, gold rushes in Alaska and the nearby Yukon Territory brought thousands of miners and settlers to Alaska. From 1879 to 1920, Alaska produced a cumulative total of over $460 million, $6,691,927,500 inflation-adjusted. Alaska was officially incorporated as an organized territory in 1912. Alaska's capital, which had been in Sitka until 1906, was moved north to Juneau. Construction of the Alaska Governor's Mansion began that same year. European immigrants from Norway and Sweden also settled in southeast Alaska, where they entered the fishing and logging industries. U.S. troops navigate snow and ice during the Battle of Attu in May 1943. During World War II, the Aleutian Islands campaign focused on Attu, Agatu, and Kiska, all of which were occupied by the Empire of Japan. During the Japanese occupation, an American civilian and 2 United States Navy personnel were killed at Attu and Kiska respectively, and nearly a total of 50 Aleut civilians and 8 sailors were interned in Japan. About half of the Aleuts died during the period of internment. On Alaska, Dutch Harbor and Adak became significant bases for the United States Army, United States Army Air Forces, and United States Navy. The United States Lend-Lease program involved flying American warplanes through Canada to Fairbanks and then Nome. Soviet pilots took possession of these aircraft, ferrying them to fight the German invasion of the Soviet Union. The construction of military bases contributed to the population growth of some Alaskan cities. Statehood. See also Alaska Statehood Act, admission to the Union, and list of U.S. states by date of admission to the Union. Bob Bartlett and Ernest Gruning, Alaska's inaugural U.S. senators, hold the 49-star U.S. flag after the admission of Alaska as the 49th state. Statehood for Alaska was an important cause of James Wickersham early in his tenure as a congressional delegate. Decades later, the statehood movement gained its first real momentum following a territorial referendum in 1946. The Alaska Statehood Committee and Alaska's Constitutional Convention would soon follow. Statehood supporters also found themselves fighting major battles against political foes, mostly in the U.S. Congress, but also within Alaska. Statehood was approved by the U.S. Congress on July 7, 1958. Alaska was officially proclaimed a state on January 3, 1959. On March 27, 1964, the massive Good Friday earthquake killed 133 people and destroyed several villages and portions of large coastal communities, mainly by the resultant tsunamis and landslides. It was the 4th most powerful earthquake in recorded history, with a moment magnitude of 9.2, more than 1,000 times as powerful as the 1989 San Francisco earthquake. 28. The time of day 5:36 p.m., time of year spring, and location of the epicenter were all cited as factors in potentially sparing thousands of lives, particularly in Anchorage. Alaska suffered a more severe megathrust earthquake on July 11, 1585, estimated at magnitude 9.25, which remains the most powerful earthquake recorded in North American history, and the 2nd most powerful earthquake recorded in world history. The Good Friday earthquake lasted for minutes and 38 seconds. 600 miles, 970 kilometers of fault ruptured at once and moved up to 60 feet, 18 meters, releasing about 500 years of stress buildup. Soil liquefaction, fissures, landslides, and other ground failures caused major structural damage in several communities and much damage to property. Anchorage sustained great destruction or damage to many inadequately earthquake-engineered houses, buildings, and infrastructure, paved streets, sidewalks, water and sewer mains, electrical systems, and other human-made equipment, particularly in the several landslide zones along Nick Arm, 200 miles 320 kilometers southwest. Some areas near Kodiak were permanently raised by 30 feet 9 meters. Southeast of Anchorage, Areas around the head of Turnagon Arm near Girdwood and Portage dropped as much as 8 feet to point for meters, requiring reconstruction and fill to raise the Seward Highway above the new high tide mark. In Prince William Sound, Port Valdez suffered a massive underwater landslide, resulting in the deaths of 32 people between the collapse of the Valdez City Harbor and docks, and inside the ship that was docked there at the time. Nearby, a 27-foot, 8.2 meters tsunami destroyed the village of Chukotka, killing 23 of the 68 people who lived there. Survivors outran the wave, climbing to high ground. Post-quake tsunamis severely affected Whittier, Seward, Kodiak, and other Alaskan communities, as well as people and property in British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California. 31. Tsunamis also caused damage in Hawaii and Japan. Evidence of motion directly related to the earthquake was also reported from Florida and Texas. Alaska had never experienced a major disaster in a highly populated area before and had very limited resources for dealing with the effects of such an event. In Anchorage, at the urging of geologist Lydia Sulkrug, the City of Anchorage and the Alaska State Housing Authority appointed a team of 40 scientists, including geologists, soil scientists, and engineers to assess the damage done by the earthquake to the city. 30 to the team, called the Engineering and Geological Evaluation Group, was headed by Ruth A.M. Schmidt, a geology professor at the University of Alaska Anchorage. The team of scientists came into conflict with local developers and downtown business owners who wanted to immediately rebuild. The scientists wanted to identify future dangers to ensure that the rebuilt infrastructure would be safe. The team produced a report on May 8, 1964, just a little more than a month after the earthquake. The United States military, which has a large active presence in Alaska, also stepped in to assist within moments of the end of the quake. The U.S. Army rapidly re-established communications with the lower 48 states, deployed troops to assist the citizens of Anchorage, and dispatched a convoy to Valdez. On the advice of military and civilian leaders, President Lyndon B. Johnson declared all of Alaska a major disaster area the day after the quake. The U.S. Navy and U.S. Coast Guard deployed ships to isolated coastal communities to assist with immediate needs. Bad weather and poor visibility hampered air rescue and observation efforts the day after the quake. But on Sunday, the 29th, the situation improved and rescue helicopters and observation aircraft were deployed. A military airlift immediately began shipping relief supplies to Alaska, eventually delivering 2,570,000 pounds, 1,170,000 kilograms of food and other supplies. Broadcast journalist Jeannie Chance assisted in recovery and relief efforts, staying on the Keeney airwaves over Anchorage for more than 24 continuous hours as the voice of calm from her temporary post. Within the Anchorage she was effectively designated as the public safety officer by the city's police chief. Chance provided breaking news of the catastrophic events that continue to develop following the magnitude 9.2 earthquake, and she served as the voice of the public safety office, coordinating response efforts, connecting available resources to needs around the community, disseminating information about shelters and prepared food rations, passing messages of well-being between loved ones, and helping to reunite families. In the longer term, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers led the effort to rebuild roads, clear debris, and establish new town sites for communities that had been completely destroyed at a cost of $110 million. The West Coast and Alaska Tsunami Warning Center was formed as a direct response to the disaster. Federal disaster relief funds paid for reconstruction, as well as financially supporting the devastated infrastructure of Alaska's government, spending hundreds of millions of dollars that helped keep Alaska financially solvent until the discovery of massive oil deposits at Prudhoe Bay. At the order of the U.S. Defense Department, the Alaska National Guard founded the Alaska Division of Emergency Services to respond to any future disasters. Oil boom 1968 discovery of oil at Prudhoe Bay and the 1977 completion of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System led to an oil boom. Royalty revenues from oil have funded large state budgets from 1980 onward. Oil pooled on rocks on the shore of Prince William Sound after the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill. Oil production was not the only economic value of Alaska's land. In the second half of the 20th century, Alaska discovered tourism as an important source of revenue. Tourism became popular after World War II when military personnel stationed in the region returned home praising its natural splendor. The Alcan Highway, built during the war, and the Alaska Marine Highway System, completed in 1963, made the state more accessible than before. Tourism has become increasingly important in Alaska, and today over 1.4 million people visit the state each year. With tourism more vital to the economy, environmentalism also rose in importance. The Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, UNILCA, of 1980 added 53.7 million acres to 117,000 square kilometers to the National Wildlife Refuge System, parts of 25 rivers to the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System, 3.3 million acres, 13,000 square kilometers to National Forest Lands, and 43.6 million acres, 176,000 square kilometers to National Parkland. Because of the act, Alaska now contains 2/3 of all American national parklands. Today, more than half of Alaskan land is owned by the federal government. In 1989, the Exxon Valdez hit a reef in the Prince William Sound, spilling more than 11 million gallons, 42 megaliters of crude oil over 1,100 miles, 1,800 kilometers of coastline. Today, the battle between philosophies of development and conservation is seen in the contentious debate over oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the proposed Pebble Mine. Located at the northwest corner of North America, Alaska is the northernmost and westernmost state in the United States, but also has the most easterly longitude in the United States because the Aleutian Islands extend into the eastern hemisphere. Alaska is the only non-contiguous U.S. state on continental North America. About 500 miles, 800 kilometers of Canadian territory consisting of British Columbia in Canada separates Alaska from Washington. It is technically part of the continental U.S., but is not usually included in the colloquial use of the term. Alaska is not part of the contiguous U.S., often called the Lower 48. The capital city, Juneau, is situated on the mainland of the North American continent, but is not connected by road to the rest of the North American highway system. The largest lake in Alaska is Lake Aliamna. The state is bordered by Canada's Yukon and British Columbia to the east, making it the only state to border only a Canadian territory, the Gulf of Alaska, and the Pacific Ocean to the south, and southwest, the Bering Sea, Bering Strait, and Chukchi Sea to the west, and the Arctic Ocean to the north. Alaska's territorial waters touch Russia's territorial waters in the Bering Strait, as the Russian Big Deal Med Island and Alaskan Little Deal Med Island are only 3 miles for 0.8 kilometers apart. Alaska has a longer coastline than all the other U.S. states combined. Alaska's size compared with the 48 contiguous states alters equal area conic projection. At 663,268 square miles, 1,717,856 square kilometers in total area, Alaska is by far the largest state. Alaska is more than twice the size of the second largest U.S. state, Texas, and it is larger than the next 3 largest states, Texas, California, and Montana combined. Alaska is the 7th largest subnational division in the world. If it was an independent nation, it would be the 18th largest country in the world, almost the same size as Iran. With its myriad islands, Alaska has nearly 34,000 miles, 55,000 kilometers of tidal shoreline. The Aleutian Islands chain extends west from the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Many active volcanoes are found in the Aleutians and in coastal regions. Unamik Island, for example, is home to Mount Shishaldin, which is an occasionally smoldering volcano that rises to 10,000 feet 3,000 meters above the North Pacific. The chain of volcanoes extends to Mount Spur, west of Anchorage on the mainland. Geologists have identified Alaska as part of Rangelia, a large region consisting of multiple states and Canadian provinces in the Pacific Northwest, which is actively undergoing continent building. One of the world's largest tides occurs in Turnagain Arm, just south of Anchorage, where tidal differences can be more than 35 feet, 10.7 meters. Alaska has more than 409,000 natural lakes at least 1 hectare or bigger. Marshlands and wetland permafrost cover 188,320 square miles for 187,700 square kilometers, mostly in northern, western, and southwest flatlands. Glacier ice covers about 28,957 square miles, 75,000 square kilometers of Alaska. The Bering Glacier is the largest glacier in North America, covering 2,008 square miles, 5,200 square kilometers alone. Regions there are no officially defined borders demarcating the various regions of Alaska. However, there are 6 regions that the state is most commonly broken up into. The most populous region of Alaska contains Anchorage, the Mont-on-Nuskasusitna Valley, and the Kenai Peninsula. Rural, mostly unpopulated areas south of the Alaska Range and west of the Wrangell Mountains also fall within the definition of South Central, as do the Prince William Sound area and the communities of Cordova and Valdez. Also referred to as the Panhandle or Inside Passage, this is the region of Alaska closest to the contiguous states. As such, this was where most of the initial non-indigenous settlement occurred in the years following the Alaska Purchase. The region is dominated by the Alexander Archipelago as well as the Tungas National Forest, the largest national forest in the United States. It contains the state capital Juneau, the former capital Sitka, and Ketchikan, at one time Alaska's largest city. The Alaska Marine Highway provides a vital surface transportation link throughout the area and country, as only 3 communities, Haines, Hyder, and Skagway, enjoy direct connections to the contiguous North American road system. The interior is the largest region of Alaska. Much of it is uninhabited wilderness. Fairbanks is the only large city in the region. Denali National Park and Preserve is located here. Denali, formerly Mount McKinley, is the highest mountain in North America and is also located here. The North Slope is mostly tundra peppered with small villages. The area is known for its massive reserves of crude oil and contains both the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska and the Prudhoe Bay oil field. The city of Utqiagvik, formerly known as Barrow, is the northernmost city in the United States and is located here. The Northwest Arctic area, anchored by Kotzebue and also containing the Kobuk River Valley, is often considered part of this region. The respective Inupiat of the North Slope and of the Northwest Arctic seldom consider themselves to be one people. Southwest Alaska is a sparsely inhabited region stretching some 500 miles 800 kilometers inland from the Bering Sea. Most of the population lives along the coast. Kodiak Island is also located in the southwest. The massive Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, one of the largest river deltas in the world, is here. Portions of the Alaska Peninsula are considered part of the Southwest, with the Aleutian Islands often, but not always, being grouped in as well. While primarily part of Southwest Alaska when grouped economically, the Aleutian Islands are sometimes recognized as an alternate group from the rest of the region due to the geographic separation from the continent. More than 300 small volcanic islands make up this chain, which stretches more than 1,200 miles, 1,900 kilometers, into the Pacific Ocean. Some of these islands fall in the Eastern Hemisphere, but the international date line was drawn west of 180 to keep the whole state, and thus the entire North American continent, within the same legal day. 2 of the islands, Batu and Kiska, were occupied by Japanese forces during World War II. According to an October 1998 report by the United States Bureau of Land Management, approximately 65% of Alaska is owned and managed by the U.S. federal government as public lands, including a multitude of national forests, national parks, and national wildlife refuges. 55. Of these, the Bureau of Land Management manages 87 million acres, 35 million hectares, or 23.8% of the state. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is managed by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. It is the world's largest wildlife refuge, comprising 16 million acres, 6.5 million hectares. Of the remaining land area, the state of Alaska owns 101 million acres, 41 million hectares, its entitlement under the Alaska Statehood Act. A portion of that acreage is occasionally ceded to the organized boroughs presented above, under the statutory provisions pertaining to newly formed boroughs. Smaller portions are set aside for rural subdivisions and other homesteading-related opportunities. These are not very popular due to the often remote and roadless locations. The University of Alaska, as a land-grant university, also owns substantial acreage, which it manages independently. Another 44 million acres, 18 million hectares, are owned by 12 regional and scores of local native corporations created under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act ANCSA of 1971. Regional Native Corporation Doyne Limited often promotes itself as the largest private landowner in Alaska in advertisements and other communications. Provisions of ANCSA allowing the corporation's land holdings to be sold on the open market starting in 1991 were repealed before they could take effect. Effectively, the corporations hold title, including subsurface title in many cases, a privilege denied to individual Alaskans, but cannot sell the land. Individual native allotments are sold on the open market. Various private interests own the remaining land, totaling about 1% of the state. Alaska is, by a large margin, the state with the smallest percentage of private land ownership when native corporation holdings are excluded. Alaska Heritage Resources Survey Alaska Heritage Resources Survey AHRS is a restricted inventory of all reported historic and prehistoric sites within the U.S. state of Alaska. It is maintained by the Office of History and Archaeology. The survey's inventory of cultural resources includes objects, structures, buildings, sites, districts, and travelways, with a general provision that they are more than 50 years old. As of the 31st of January 2012, more than 35,000 sites have been reported. Alaska is not divided into counties, like Louisiana's parishes, and unlike most of the other U.S. states, but it is divided into boroughs. Delegates to the Alaska Constitutional Convention wanted to avoid the pitfalls of the traditional county system and adopted their own unique model. Many of the more densely populated parts of the state are part of Alaska's 16 boroughs, which function somewhat similarly to counties in other states. Unlike county equivalents in the other states, the boroughs do not cover the state's entire land area. The area not part of any borough is referred to as the unorganized borough. The unorganized borough has no government of its own, but the U.S. Census Bureau, in cooperation with the state, divided the unorganized borough into 11 census areas solely for the purposes of statistica, analysis, and presentation. A recording district is a mechanism for management of the public record in Alaska. The state is divided into 30 for recording districts, which are centrally administered under a state recorder. All recording districts use the same acceptance criteria, fee schedule, etc., for accepting documents into the public record, whereas many U.S. states use a three-tiered system of decentralization: state, county, township. Most of Alaska uses only two-tier: state, borough. Owing to the low population density, most of the land is located in the unorganized borough. As the name implies, it has no intermediate borough government, but is administered directly by the state government. In 2000, 57.71% of Alaska's area has this status, with 13.05%. Anchorage merged the city government with the Greater Anchorage Area Borough in 1975 to form the municipality of Anchorage, containing the city proper and the communities of Eagle River, Chukotka, Peters Creek, Girdwood, Bird, and Indian. Fairbanks has a separate borough, the Fairbanks North Star Borough, and municipality, the City of Fairbanks. The state's most populous city is Anchorage, home to 291,247 people in 2060. The richest location in Alaska by per capita income is Denali, $42,245. Yakutat City, Sitka, Juneau, and Anchorage are the four largest cities in the U.S. by area. As reflected in the 2020 United States Census, Alaska has a total of 355 incorporated cities and census-designated places CDPs 61. The tally of cities includes for unified municipalities, essentially the equivalent of a consolidated city-county. The majority of these communities are located in the rural expanse of Alaska known as the Bush and are unconnected to that contiguous North American road network. The table at the bottom of this section lists the 100 largest cities and census-designated places in Alaska, in population order, of Alaska's 2020 U.S. Census population figure of 733,391, 16,655 people, or to 0.7% of the population, did not live in an incorporated city or census-designated place. Approximately 3/4 of that figure were people who live in urban and suburban neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city limits of Ketchikan, Kodiak, Palmer, and Wasilla. CDPs have not been established for these areas by the United States Census Bureau, except that 7 CDPs were established for the Ketchikan area neighborhoods in the 1980 census: Clover Pass, Herring Cove, Ketchikan East, Mountain Point, Alaska Route 7, Pennock Island, and Saxman East, but have not been used since. The remaining population was scattered throughout Alaska, both within organized boroughs and in the unorganized borough, in largely remote areas. Alaska is the coldest state in the United States. The climate in the south and southeastern Alaska is a mid-latitude oceanic climate, Köppen climate classification, CFB, and a subarctic oceanic climate, Köppen CFC in the northern parts, with cool summers and relatively mild winters. On an annual basis, the southeast is both the wettest and warmest part of Alaska, with milder temperatures in the winter and high precipitation throughout the year. Juneau averages over 50 and 130 centimeters of precipitation a year, and Ketchikan averages over 150 and 380 centimeters. This is also the only region in Alaska in which the average daytime high temperature is above freezing during the winter months. Köppen climate types of Alaska's climate of Anchorage and south-central Alaska is mild by Alaskan standards due to the region's proximity to the seacoast. While the area gets less rain than southeast Alaska, it gets more snow, and days tend to be clearer. On average, Anchorage receives 16 and 41 centimeters of precipitation a year, with around 75 and 190 centimeters of snow, although there are areas in the south-central which receive far more snow. It is a subarctic climate, Köppen, DFC, due to its brief, cool summers. The climate of western Alaska is determined in large part by the Bering Sea and the Gulf of Alaska. It is a subarctic oceanic climate in the southwest and a continental subarctic climate farther north. The temperature is somewhat moderate considering how far north the area is. This region has a tremendous amount of variety in precipitation. An area stretching from the northern side of the Seward Peninsula to the Kobuk River Valley, i.e., the region around Kotzebue Sound, is technically a desert, with portions receiving less than 10 in 25 centimeters of precipitation annually. On the other extreme, some locations between Dillingham and Bethel average around 100 and 250 centimeters of precipitation. The climate of the interior of Alaska is subarctic and is a classic example of a continental subarctic climate, except in a few valleys where the climate approaches humid continental Köppen, DFB. Some of the highest and lowest temperatures in Alaska occur around the area near Fairbanks. Summers are warm, albeit generally short, and may have temperatures reaching into the 90s degrees Fahrenheit, the low to mid-30s C. while in the long and very cold winters, the temperature can fall below 60 F51C. Precipitation is sparse in the interior, often less than 10 in 25 centimeters a year. But what precipitation falls in the winter tends to stay the entire winter. The highest and lowest recorded temperatures in Alaska are both in the interior. The highest is 100 F38 Celsius in Fort Yukon, which is just 8 miles or 13 kilometers inside the Arctic Circle on June 27, 1915. 66-67, making Alaska tied with Hawaii as the state with the lowest high temperature in the United States. 68-69. The lowest official Alaska temperature is 80 F60 to see in Prospect Creek on January 23, 1971. 1 degree above the lowest temperature recorded in continental North America in Snag, Yukon, Canada. The climate in the extreme north of Alaska, north of the Brooks Range, is Arctic ET with long, very cold winters and short, cool summers. Even in July, the average low temperature in Utkivik is 30 for F1 Celsius. 71. Precipitation is light in this part of Alaska, with many places averaging less than 10 in 25 centimeters per year, mostly as snow which stays on the ground almost the entire year. The United States Census Bureau found in the 2020 United States Census that the population of Alaska was 733,391 on April 1, 2020, a 3.3% increase since the 2010 United States Census. 6. According to the 2010 United States Census, the U.S. state of Alaska had a population of 710,231, a 13.3% increase from 626,932 at the 2000 U.S. Census. In 2020, Alaska ranked as the 48th largest state by population, ahead of only Vermont and Wyoming. Alaska is the least densely populated state and one of the most sparsely populated areas in the world, at 1.2 inhabitants per square mile, 0.46 per square kilometers, with the next state, Wyoming, at 5.8 inhabitants per square mile to 0.2 per square kilometers. Alaska is by far the largest U.S. state by area and the 10th wealthiest per capita income. As of 2018, due to its population size, it is one of 14 U.S. states that still have only one telephone area code. According to HUD's 2022 Annual Homeless Assessment Report, there were an estimated 2,320 homeless people in Alaska. The 2019 American Community Survey estimated 60.2% of the population was non-Hispanic white, 3.7% Black or African American, 15.6% American Indian or Alaska Native, 6.5% Asian, 1.4% Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, 7.5% 2 or more races, and 7.3% Hispanic or Latin American. At the survey estimates, 7.8% of the total population was foreign-born from 2015 to 2019. In 2015, 61.3% was non-Hispanic white, 3.4% Black or African American, 13.3% American Indian or Alaska Native, 6.2% Asian, 0.9% Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, 0.3% some other race, and 7.7% multiracial. Hispanics and Latin Americans were 7% of the state population in 2015. From 2015 to 2019, the largest Hispanic and Latin American groups were Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, and Cuban Americans. The largest Asian groups living in the state were Filipinos, Korean Americans, and Japanese and Chinese Americans. The state was 66.7% white, 60.1% non-Hispanic white, 14.8% American Indian and Alaska Native, 5.4% Asian, 3.3% Black or African American, 1.0% Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, 1.6% from some other race, and 7.3% from 2 or more. Hispanics or Latin Americans of any race made up 5.5% of the population in 2010. 88. As of 2011, 50.7% of Alaska's population younger than 1 year of age belonged to minority groups, i.e., did not have to parents of non-Hispanic white ancestry. 89. In 1960, the United States Census Bureau reported Alaska's population as 77.2% white, 3% black, and 18.8% American Indian and Alaska Native. In 2018, the top countries of origin for Alaska's immigrants were the Philippines, Mexico, Canada, Thailand, and South Korea. According to the 2011 American Community Survey, 83.4% of people over the age of 5 spoke only English at home. About 3.5% spoke Spanish at home, to 0.2% spoke another Indo-European language. About 4.3% spoke an Asian language, including Tagalog. 92, and about 5.3% spoke other languages at home. 93. In 2019, the American Community Survey determined 83.7% spoke only English, and 16.3% spoke another language other than English. The most spoken European language after English was Spanish, spoken by approximately 4.0% of the state population. Collectively, Asian and Pacific Islander languages were spoken by 5.6% of Alaskans. 94. Since 2010, a total of 5.2% of Alaskans speak one of the state's 20 indigenous languages, known locally as native languages. The Alaska Native Language Center at the University of Alaska Fairbanks claims that at least 20 Alaskan native languages exist, and there are also some languages with different dialects. Most of Alaska's native languages belong to either the Eskimo Aleut or Nadine language families. Some languages are thought to be isolates, e.g. Haida, or have not yet been classified, e.g. Tsimshiani. 196. As of 2014, nearly all of Alaska's native languages were classified as either threatened, shifting, moribund, nearly extinct, or dormant languages. In October 2014, the governor of Alaska signed a bill declaring the state's 20 indigenous languages to have official status. This bill gave them symbolic recognition as official languages, though they have not been adopted for official use within the government. The 20 languages that were included in the bill are Inupi Aksiberian Yupik Central Alaskan Yupakalutikwan Dangina, Deg Zinagolika Chakukan, Kusko Quimwicker Pantantananatana Krashashnafathash. According to statistics collected by the Association of Religion Data Archives ARDA from 2010, about 30% of Alaska residents were members of religious congregations. Of the religious population, roughly 4% were Mormon, 0.5% Jewish, 0.5% Muslim, 1% Buddhist, 0.2% Baha'i, and 0.5% Hindu. The largest religious denominations in Alaska as of 2010 was the Catholic Church with 50,866 adherents, non-denominational evangelicals with 38,070 adherents, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with 32,170 adherents, and the Southern Baptist Convention with 19,891 adherents. Alaska has been identified, along with Washington and Oregon in the Pacific Northwest, as being the least religious states in the United States in terms of church membership. The Pew Research Center in 2014 determined 62% of the adult population practiced Christianity. Of the Christian denominations, Catholicism was the largest Christian group. When Protestant denominations were combined, Protestantism was the largest Christian tradition, with evangelicalism being the largest movement within the Protestant group. The unaffiliated population made up the largest non-Christian religious affiliation at 37%. Atheists made up 5% of the population, and the largest non-Christian religion was Buddhism. In 2020, the Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, determined 57% of adults were Christian. 108. By 2022, Christianity increased to 77% of the population according to the PRRI. Through the Association of Religion Data Archives in 2020, its Christian population was dominated by interdenominational Protestantism as the single largest Christian cohort, with 73,930 adherents. Roman Catholics were second, with 40,280 members. Throughout its Christian population, non-denominational Christians had an adherence rate of 100.81 per 1,000 residents, and Catholics 50 for 0.9 to per 1,000 residents. Per 2014's Pew study, religion was seen as very important to 41% of the population, although 29% considered it somewhat important. In 2014, Pew determined roughly 55% believed in God with absolute certainty, and 24% believed fairly certainly. Reflecting the separate 2020 ARDA study, the 2014 Pew study showed 30% attended religious services once a week, 30% once or twice a month, and 36% seldom. Never. In 2018, the Gospel Coalition published an article using Pew data and determined non-church-going Christians nationwide did not attend religious services often through the following: practicing the faith, in other ways, not finding a house of worship they liked, disliking sermons and feeling unwelcomed, and logistics. In 1795, the first Russian Orthodox Church was established in Kodiak. Intermarriage with Alaskan natives helped the Russian immigrants integrate into society. As a result, an increasing number of Russian Orthodox churches gradually became established within Alaska. 112. Alaska also has the largest Quaker population by percentage of any state. In 2009, there were 6,000 Jews in Alaska for whom observance of Hanukkah may pose special problems. Alaskan Hindus often share venues and celebrations with members of other Asian religious communities, including Sikhs and Jains. In 2010, Alaskan Hindus established the Sri Ganesha Temple of Alaska, making it the first Hindu temple in Alaska and the northernmost Hindu temple in the world. There are an estimated 2,000 to 3,000 Hindus in Alaska. The vast majority of Hindus live in Anchorage or Fairbanks. Estimates for the number of Muslims in Alaska range from 2,000 to 5,000. 118, 119, 120. In 2020, ARDA estimated there were 400 Muslims in the state. 109. The Islamic Community Center of Anchorage began efforts in the late 1990s to construct a mosque in Anchorage. They broke ground on a building in South Anchorage in 2010 and were nearing completion in late 2014. When completed, the mosque was the first in the state and one of the northernmost mosques in the world. 121. There is also a Baha'i Center, and there were 690 adherents in 2020. 109. Additionally, there were 469 adherents of Hinduism and yoga altogether in 2020, and a small number of Buddhists were present. Economy of Alaska locations by per capita income and list of Alaska Companies-aerial view of infrastructure at the Prudhoe Bay oil field as of October 2022. Alaska had a total employment of 316,900. The number of employer establishments was 21,077. The 2018 gross state product was $55 billion, 48th in the U.S. Its per capita personal income for 2018 was $73,000, ranking 7th in the nation. According to a 2013 study by Phoenix Marketing International, Alaska had the 5th largest number of millionaires per capita in the United States, with a ratio of 6.75%. The oil and gas industry dominates the Alaskan economy, with more than 80% of the state's revenues derived from petroleum extraction. Alaska's main export product, excluding oil and natural gas, is seafood, primarily salmon, cod, pollock, and crab. Agriculture represents a very small fraction of the Alaskan economy. Agricultural production is primarily for consumption within the state and includes nursery stock, dairy products, vegetables, and livestock. Manufacturing is limited, with most foodstuffs and general goods imported from elsewhere. Employment is primarily in government and industries such as natural resource extraction, shipping, and transportation. Military bases are a significant component of the economy in the Fairbanks, North Star, Anchorage, and Kodiak Island boroughs, as well as Kodiak. Federal subsidies are also an important part of the economy, allowing the state to keep taxes low. Its industrial outputs are crude petroleum, natural gas, coal, gold, precious metals, zinc and other mining, seafood processing, timber, and wood products. There is also a growing service and tourism sector. Tourists have contributed to the economy by supporting local lodging. Energy also. Natural gas in Alaska, list of power stations in Alaska, and Energy Law Section Alaska Law Trans-Alaska Pipeline transports oil, Alaska's most financially important export, from the North Slope to Valdez. The heat pipes in the column mounts are pertinent, since they disperse heat upwards and prevent melting of permafrost. Alaska proven oil reserves peaked in 1973 and have declined more than 60% since then. Alaskan oil production peaked in 1988 and has declined more than 75% since then. Alaska has vast energy resources, although its oil reserves have been largely depleted. Major oil and gas reserves were found in the Alaska North Slope and Cook Inlet basins. But according to the Energy Information Administration, by February 2014, Alaska had fallen to 4th place in the nation in crude oil production after Texas, North Dakota, and California. Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's North Slope is still the second highest yielding oil field in the United States, typically producing about 400,000 barrels per day, 64,000 cubic meters d. Although by early 2014, North Dakota's Bakken Formation was producing over 900,000 barrels per day, 140,000. Prudhoe Bay was the largest conventional oil field ever discovered in North America, but was much smaller than Canada's enormous Athabasca oil sands field, which by 2014 was producing about 1,500 barrels per day, 240,000 cubic meters d of unconventional oil, and had hundreds of years of producible reserves at that rate. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline can transport and pump up to 2.1 million barrels, 330,000 cubic meters of crude oil per day, more than any other crude oil pipeline in the United States. Additionally, substantial coal deposits are found in Alaska's bituminous, subbituminous, and lignite coal basins. The United States Geological Survey estimates that there are 85.4 trillion cubic feet, 2,420 cubic kilometers of undiscovered, technically recoverable gas from natural gas hydrates on the Alaskan North Slope. Alaska also offers some of the highest hydroelectric power potential in the country from its numerous rivers. Large swaths of the Alaskan coastline offer wind and geothermal energy potential as well. Alaska's economy depends heavily on increasingly expensive diesel fuel for heating, transportation, electric power, and light. Although wind and hydroelectric power are abundant and underdeveloped, proposals for statewide energy systems were judged uneconomical at the time of the report. 2001, due to low less than 50 per gallons fuel prices, long distances, and low population. The cost of a gallon of gas in urban Alaska is usually 30 to 60 cents higher than the national average. Prices in rural areas are generally significantly higher, but vary widely depending on transportation and costs, seasonal usage peaks, nearby petroleum development infrastructure, and many other factors. Permanent Fund. The Alaska Permanent Fund is a constitutionally authorized appropriation of oil revenues, established by voters in 1976 to manage a surplus in state petroleum revenues from oil, largely in anticipation of the then recently constructed Trans-Alaska Pipeline system. The fund was originally proposed by Governor Keith Miller on the eve of the 1969 Prudhoe Bay lease sale, out of fear that the legislature would spend the entire proceeds of the sale, which amounted to $900 million at once. It was later championed by Governor Jay Hammond and Kenai State Representative Hugh Malone. It has served as an attractive political prospect ever since, diverting revenues which would normally be deposited into the general fund. The Alaska Constitution was written so as to discourage dedicating state funds for a particular purpose. The permanent fund has become the rare exception to this, mostly due to the political climate of distrust existing during the time of its creation. From its initial principle of $730 for $1,000, the fund has grown to $50 billion as a result of oil royalties and capital investment programs 134. Most, if not all, the principal is invested conservatively outside Alaska. This has led to frequent calls by Alaskan politicians for the fund to make investments within Alaska, though such a stance has never gained momentum. Starting in 1982, dividends from the fund's annual growth have been paid out each year to eligible Alaskans, ranging from an initial $1,000 in 1982 equal to 3 years' payout, as the distribution of payments was held up in a lawsuit over the distribution scheme to $3,269. In 2008, which included a one-time $1,200 every year, the state legislature takes out 8% from the earnings, puts 3% back into the principal for inflation proofing, and the remaining 5% is distributed to all qualifying Alaskans. To qualify for the permanent fund dividend, one must have lived in the state for a minimum of 12 months, maintain constant residency subject to allowable absences, and not be subject to court judgments or criminal convictions which fall under various disqualifying classifications or may subject the payment amount to civil garnishment. The permanent fund is often considered to be one of the leading examples of a basic income policy in the world. Cost of goods in Alaska has long been higher than in the contiguous 48 states. Federal government employees, particularly United States Postal Service, USPS workers, and active duty military members, receive a cost of living allowance usually set at 25% of base pay because, while the cost of living has gone down, it is still one of the highest in the country. Rural Alaska suffers from extremely high prices for food and consumer goods compared to the rest of the country, due to the relatively limited transportation infrastructure. Agriculture and fishing halibut, both as a sport fish and commercially, is important to the state's economy. Due to the northern climate and short growing season, relatively little farming occurs in Alaska. Most farms are in either the Matanuska Valley, about 40 miles 64 kilometers northeast of Anchorage, or on the Kenai Peninsula, about 60 miles 97 kilometers southwest of Anchorage. The short 100-day growing season limits the crops that can be grown, but the long sunny summer days make for productive growing seasons. The primary crops are potatoes, carrots, lettuce, and cabbage. The Tanana Valley is another notable agricultural locus, especially the Delta Junction area, about 100 miles 160 kilometers southeast of Fairbanks, with a sizable concentration of farms growing agronomic crops. These farms mostly lie north and east of Fort Greely. This area was largely set aside and developed under a state program spearheaded by Hammond during his second term as governor. Delta area crops consist predominantly of barley and hay. West of Fairbanks lies another concentration of small farms catering to restaurants, the hotel and tourist industry, and community-supported agriculture. Alaskan agriculture has experienced a surge in growth of market gardeners, small farms, and farmers markets in recent years, with the highest percentage increase 46% in the nation in growth in farmers markets in 2011, compared to 17% nationwide. The peony industry has also taken off, as the growing season allows farmers to harvest during a gap in supply elsewhere in the world, thereby filling a niche in the flower market. Alaska, with no counties, lacks county fairs. Instead, a small assortment of state and local fairs, with the Alaska State Fair in Palmer the largest, are held mostly in the late summer. The fairs are mostly located in communities with historic or current agricultural activity, and feature local farmers exhibiting produce in addition to more high-profile commercial activities such as carnival rides, concerts, and food. Alaska Grown is used as an agricultural slogan. Alaska has an abundance of seafood, with the primary fisheries in the Bering Sea and the North Pacific. Seafood is one of the few food items that is often cheaper within the state than outside it. Many Alaskans take advantage of salmon seasons to harvest portions of their household diet while fishing for subsistence, as well as sport. This includes fish taken by hook, net, or wheel. Hunting for subsistence, primarily caribou, moose, and Dall sheep, is still common in the state, particularly in remote bush communities. An example of a traditional native food is a Chukotka, the Eskimo ice cream, which can consist of reindeer fat, seal oil, dried fish meat, and local berries. Alaska's reindeer herding is concentrated on Seward Peninsula, where wild caribou can be prevented from mingling and migrating with the domesticated reindeer. Most food in Alaska is transported into the state from outside the other 49 U.S. states, and shipping costs make food in the cities relatively expensive. In rural areas, subsistence hunting and gathering is an essential activity because imported food is prohibitively expensive. Although most small towns and villages in Alaska lie along the coastline, the cost of importing food to remote villages can be high because of the terrain and difficult road conditions, which change dramatically due to varying climate and precipitation changes. Transport costs can reach $50 per pound, $1.10 per kilogram, or higher in some remote areas during times of inclement weather or rough terrain conditions, if these locations can be reached at all. The cost of delivering a gallon 3.8 L of milk is about $3.50 in many villages, where per capita income can be $20,000 or less. Fuel cost per gallon is routinely 20 to 30 cents higher than the contiguous United States average, with only Hawaii having higher prices. The Alaska Department of Education and Early Development administers many school districts in Alaska. In addition, the state operates a boarding school, MT, Edgecombe High School in Sitka, and provides partial funding for other boarding schools, including Nenana Student Living Center in Nenana and the Galena Interior Learning Academy in Galena. 160 for there are more than a dozen colleges and universities in Alaska. Accredited universities in Alaska include the University of Alaska Anchorage, University of Alaska Fairbanks, University of Alaska Southeast, and Alaska Pacific University. 165. Alaska is the only state that has no collegiate athletic programs that are members of NCAA Division I, although both Alaska Fairbanks and Alaska Anchorage maintain single sport membership in Division I. For men's ice hockey, the Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development operates a VTEC, Alaska's Institute of Technology. 166 campuses in Seward and Anchorage offer 1-week to 11-month training programs in areas as diverse as information technology, welding, nursing, and mechanics. Alaska has had a problem with a brain drain. Many of its young people, including most of the highest academic achievers, leave the state after high school graduation and do not return. As of 2013, Alaska did not have a law school or medical school. The University of Alaska has attempted to combat this by offering partial 4-year scholarships to the top 10% of Alaska high school graduates via the Alaska Scholars Program. Beginning in 1998, schools in rural Alaska must have at least 10 students to retain funding from the state, and campuses not meeting the number close. This was due to the loss in oil revenues that previously propped up smaller rural schools. In 2015, there was a proposal to raise that minimum to 25, but legislators in the state largely did not agree. Alaska has few road connections compared to the rest of the U.S. The state's road system, covering a relatively small area of the state, linking the central population centers and the Alaska Highway, the principal route out of the state through Canada. The state capital, Juneau, is not accessible by road, with access only being through ferry or flight. This has spurred debate over decades about moving the capital to a city on the road system, or building a road connection from Haines. The western part of Alaska has no road system connecting the communities with the rest of Alaska. The interstate highways in Alaska consists of a total of 1,082 miles, 1,741 kilometers. One unique feature of the Alaska highway system is the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, an active Alaska Railroad tunnel recently upgraded to provide a paved roadway link with the isolated community of Whittier on Prince William Sound to the Seward Highway about 50 miles 80 kilometers southeast of Anchorage at Portage. At 2.5 miles for 0.0 kilometers, the tunnel was the longest road tunnel in North America until 2007. The tunnel is the longest combination road and rail tunnel in North America. Southwest Alaska is largely coastal, sparsely populated, and unconnected to the road system. Access to most communities in Southwest Alaska is primarily by air taxi, although larger towns like Kodiak, Bethel, King Salmon, Dillingham, and Dutch Harbor are accessible by scheduled air service. Additionally, some coastal communities can be reached via the Alaska Marine Highway Ferry Rail built around 1915. The Alaska Railroad played a key role in the development of Alaska through the 20th century. It links shipping lanes on the North Pacific with interior Alaska with tracks that run from Seward by way of south-central Alaska, passing through Anchorage, Eklutna, Wasilla, Talkeetna, Denali, and Fairbanks, with spurs to Whittier, Palmer, and North Pole. The cities, towns, villages, and regions served by air tracks are known statewide as the Rail Belt. In recent years, the ever-improving paved highway system began to eclipse the railroad's importance in Alaska's economy. The railroad played a vital role in Alaska's development, moving freight into Alaska while transporting natural resources southward, such as coal from the Usabelli coal mine near Healy to Seward and gravel from the Matanuska Valley to Anchorage. It is well known for its summertime tour passenger service. The Alaska Railroad was one of the last railroads in North America to use cabooses in regular service and still uses them on some gravel trains. It continues to offer one of the last flag stop routes in the country. A stretch of about 60 miles, 100 kilometers of track along an area north of Talkeetna remains inaccessible by road. The railroad provides the only transportation to rural homes and cabins in the area. Until construction of the Parks Highway in the 1970s, the railroad provided the only land access to most of the region along its entire route. In northern southeast Alaska, the White Pass and Yukon route also partly runs through the state from Skagway northwards into Canada, British Columbia, and Yukon Territory, crossing the border at White Pass Summit. This line is now mainly used by tourists, often arriving by cruise liner at Skagway. It was featured in the 1983 BBC television series Great Little Railways. These two railroads are connected neither to each other nor any other railroad. The nearest link to the North American Railway network is the northwest terminus of the Canadian National Railway at Prince Rupert, British Columbia, several hundred miles to the southeast. In 2000, the U.S. Congress authorized $6 million to study the feasibility of a rail link between Alaska, Canada, and the lower 48. As of 2021, the Alaska-Alberta Railway Development Corporation had been placed into receivership. Some private companies provides car float service between Whittier and Seattle. Many cities, towns, and villages in the state do not have road or highway access. The only modes of access involve travel by air, river, or the sea. The MV Tustumena, named after Tustumena Glacier, is one of the state's many ferries, providing service between the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and the Aleutian Chain. Alaska's well-developed state-owned ferry system, known as the Alaska Marine Highway, serves the cities of Southeast, the Gulf Coast, and the Alaska Peninsula. The ferries transport vehicles as well as passengers. The system also operates a ferry service from Bellingham, Washington, and Prince Rupert, British Columbia, in Canada through the Inside Passage to Skagway. The Inter-Island Ferry Authority also serves as an important marine link for many communities in the Prince of Wales Island region of Southeast and works in concert with the Alaska Marine Highway. In recent years, cruise lines have created a summertime tourism market mainly connecting the Pacific Northwest to southeast Alaska and, to a lesser degree, towns along Alaska's Gulf Coast. The population of Ketchikan, for example, fluctuates dramatically on many days up to for large cruise ships can dock there at the same time. Air cities not served by road, sea, or river can be reached only by air, foot, dogsled, or snow machine, accounting for Alaska's extremely well-developed bush air services and Alaskan novelty. Anchorage, and to a lesser extent Fairbanks, is served by many major airlines. Because of limited highway access, air travel remains the most efficient form of transportation in and out of the state. Anchorage recently completed extensive remodeling and construction at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport to help accommodate the upsurge in tourism in 2012-2013. Alaska received almost 2 million visitors, making regular flights to most villages and towns within the state commercially viable is difficult, so they are heavily subsidized by the federal government through the Essential Air Service program. Alaska Airlines is the only major airline offering in-state travel with jet service, sometimes in combination cargo and passenger Boeing 737-400s from Anchorage, and Fairbanks to regional hubs like Bethel, Nome, Kotzebue, Dillingham, Kodiak, and other larger communities, as well as to major Southeast and Alaska Peninsula communities. A Bombardier Dash 8, operated by Aero Alaska, on approach to Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport. The bulk of remaining commercial flight offerings come from small regional commuter airlines such as Ravn Alaska, Panair, and Frontier Flying Service. The smallest towns and villages must rely on scheduled or chartered bush flying services using general aviation aircraft such as the Cessna Caravan, the most popular aircraft in use in the state. Much of this service can be attributed to the Alaska Bypass Mail Program, which subsidizes bulk mail delivery to Alaskan rural communities. The program requires 70% of that subsidy to go to carriers who offer passenger service to the communities. Many communities have small air taxi services. These operations originated from the demand for customized transport to remote areas. Perhaps the most quintessentially Alaskan plane is the Bush seaplane. The world's busiest seaplane base is Lakewood, located next to Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport, where flights bound for remote villages without an airstrip carry passengers, cargo, and many items from stores and warehouse clubs. In 2006, Alaska had the highest number of pilots per capita of any U.S. state. In Alaska, there are 8,795 active pilot certificates as of 2020. Now another Alaskan transportation method is the dogsled. In modern times, that is, any time after the mid-late 1920s, dog mushing is more of a sport than a true means of transportation. Various races are held around the state, but the best known is the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race, a 1,150-mile, 1,850 kilometers trail from Anchorage to Nome, although the distance varies from year to year. The official distance is set at 1,049 miles or 1,688 kilometers. The race commemorates the famous 1925 Serum Run to Nome, in which mushers and dogs like Togo and Balto took much-needed medicine to the diphtheria-stricken community of Nome. When all other means of transportation had failed, mushers from all over the world come to Anchorage each March to compete for cash, prizes, and prestige. The Serum Run is another sled dog race that more accurately follows the route of the famous 1925 relay, leaving from the community of Nenana southwest of Fairbanks to Nome. In areas not served by road or rail, primary transportation in summer is by all-terrain vehicle and in winter by snowmobile or snow machine, as it is commonly referred to in Alaska. Like all other U.S. states, Alaska is governed as a republic, with 3 branches of government: an executive branch consisting of the governor of Alaska and their appointees, which head executive departments, a legislative branch consisting of the Alaska House of Representatives and Alaska Senate, and a judicial branch consisting of the Alaska Supreme Court and lower courts. The state of Alaska employs approximately 16,000 people statewide. The Alaska State Legislature consists of a 40-member House of Representatives and a 20-member Senate. Senators serve 4-year terms and House members too. The Governor of Alaska serves 4-year terms. The Lieutenant Governor runs separately from the Governor in the primaries, but during the general election, the nominee for Governor and nominee for Lieutenant Governor run together on the same ticket. Alaska's court system has 4 levels: the Alaska Supreme Court, the Alaska Court of Appeals, the Superior Courts, and the District Courts. The Superior and District Courts are trial courts. Superior Courts are courts of general jurisdiction, while District Courts hear only certain types of cases, including misdemeanor criminal cases and civil cases valued up to $100,000. The Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals are appellate courts. The Court of Appeals is required to hear appeals from certain lower court decisions, including those regarding criminal prosecutions, juvenile delinquency, and habeas corpus. The Supreme Court hears civil appeals and may, in its discretion, hear criminal appeals. Although in its early years of statehood, Alaska was a Democratic state, since the early 1970s, it has been characterized as Republican-leaning. Local political communities have often worked on issues related to land use development, fishing, tourism, and individual rights. Alaska Natives, while organized in and around their communities, have been active within the native corporations. These have been given ownership over large tracts of land, which require stewardship. The state has an independence movement favoring a vote on secession from the United States, with the Alaskan Independence Party. 6 Republicans and 4 Democrats have served as governor of Alaska. In addition, Republican Governor Wally Hickel was elected to the office for a 2nd term in 1990 after leaving the Republican Party and briefly joining the Alaskan Independence Party ticket just long enough to be re-elected. He officially rejoined the Republican Party in 1994. Alaska regularly supports Republicans in presidential elections and has done so since statehood. Republicans have won the state's electoral college votes in all but one election that it has participated in 1964. No state has voted for a Democratic presidential candidate fewer times. Alaska was carried by Democratic nominee Lyndon B. Johnson during his landslide election in 1964, while the 1960 and 1968 elections were close. Since 1972, Republicans have carried the state by large margins. In 2008, Republican John McCain defeated Democrat Barack Obama in Alaska 59.49% to 37.83%. McCain's running mate was Sarah Palin, the state's governor, and the first Alaskan on a major party ticket. Obama lost Alaska again in 2012, but he captured 40% of the state's vote in that election, making him the first Democrat to do so since 1968. In 2020, Joe Biden received 42.77% of the vote for president, marking the high point for a Democratic presidential candidate since Johnson's 1960 for victory. The Alaska Bush, Central Juneau, Midtown and downtown Anchorage, and the areas surrounding the University of Alaska Fairbanks campus and Esther have been strongholds of the Democratic Party. The Mont-on-Nuskassusitna borough, the majority of Fairbanks, including North Pole and the military base, and South Anchorage typically have the strongest Republican showing. Alaska has a history of primary defeats for incumbent U.S. senators, including Ernest Gruning, Mike Gravel, and Lisa Murkowski. However, Murkowski won re-election with a write-in campaign. Despite this, Alaska has also seen long-serving members of Congress, such as Ted Stevens, who served as a U.S. Senator for 40 years, and Don Young, who held Alaska's sole U.S. House seat for 49 years from 1973 to 2022. In the 2020 election cycle, Alaskan voters approved Ballot Measure 2. The measure passed by a margin of 1.1%, or about 4,000 votes. The measure requires campaigns to disclose the original source and any intermediaries for campaign contributions over $2,000. The measure also establishes nonpartisan primaries sometimes called jungle primaries, for statewide elections like in Washington State and California, and ranked choice voting like in Maine. 200 to measure to makes Alaska the third state with nonpartisan primaries for all statewide races, the second state with ranked choice voting, and the only state with both. The 2020 special election to fill Alaska's only U.S. House seat, left vacant by the death of Don Young, was won by Mary Peltola. She became the first Democrat to win the House seat since 1972 and the first Alaskan Native elected to the United States Congress in history. After winning a full term in the 2020 general election, Peltola lost re-election in 2024 to Republican Nick Begich III.